Chapter 5. A memorable visit to Stambourne. Mr. Knill's prophecy. The story of Mr. Knill's prophesying that I should preach the gospel in Rowland Hill's chapel and to the largest congregations in the world has been regarded by many as a legend, but it was strictly true. Mr. Knill took the county of Essex in the year 1844 and traversed the region from town to town as a deputation for the London Missionary Society. In the course of that journey, he spent a little time at Stambourne Parsonage. In his heart burned the true missionary spirit, for he sought the souls of young and old whenever they came in his way. He was a great soul winner, and he soon spied out the boy. He said to me, "Where do you sleep? For I want to call you up in the morning." I showed him my little room, and he took good note of it. At 6 o'clock he called me up. There stood in my grandfather's garden 2 arbours made of yew trees, cut into sugar loaf fashion. Though the old manse had given way to a new one, and the old chapel has gone also, yet the yew trees still flourish aforetime. We went into the right-hand arbour, and there, in the sweetest way, he told me of the love of Jesus, and the blessedness of trusting in him and loving him in our childhood. With many a story, he preached Christ to me, and told me how good God had been to him. And then he prayed that I might know the Lord and serve him. He knelt down in that arbour, and prayed for me with his arms about my neck. He did not seem content unless I kept with him in the interval between the services. He heard my childish talk with patient love, and repaid it with gracious instruction. On 3 successive days he taught me and prayed with me, and before he had to leave, my grandfather had come back from the place where he had gone to preach, and all the family were gathered to morning prayer. Then, in the presence of them all, Mr. Knill took me on his knee and said, "This child will one day preach the gospel, and he will preach it to great multitudes. I am persuaded that he will preach in the chapel of Rowland Hill, where, I think he said, I am now the minister." He spoke very solemnly, and called upon all present to witness what he said. Then he gave me 6 pence as a reward if I would learn the hymn, "God moves in a mysterious way, his wonders to perform." I was made to promise that when I preached in Rowland Hill's chapel, that hymn should be sung. Think of that as a promise from a child. Would it ever be other than an idle dream? Years flew by. After I had begun for some little time to preach in London, Dr. Alexander Fletcher was engaged to deliver the annual sermon to children in Surrey Chapel. But as he was taken ill, I was asked in a hurry to preach to the children in his stead. "Yes," I replied, "I will. If you will allow the children to sing, 'God moves in a mysterious way.' I have made a promise long ago that so that hymn should be sung, and so it was. I preached in Rowland Hill's chapel, and the hymn was sung. My emotions on that occasion I cannot describe, for the word of the Lord's servant was fulfilled. Still, I fancy that Surrey was not the chapel which Mr. Knill intended. How was I to go to the country chapel? As unsought by me, the minister at Wootton under Edge, which was Mr. Hill's summer residence, invited me to preach there. I went on the condition that the congregation should sing, "God moves in a mysterious way," which was also done. To me, it was a very wonderful thing, and I no more understood at that time how it came to pass than I understand today why the Lord should be so gracious to me. Did the words of Mr. Knill help to bring about their own fulfillment? I think so. I believed them, and looked forward to the same time when I should preach the word. I felt very powerfully that no unconverted person might dare to enter the ministry. This made me, I doubt not, all the more intent upon seeking salvation, and more hopeful of it. And when by grace enabled to cast myself upon the Saviour's love, it was not long before my mouth began to speak of his redemption. How came that sober-minded minister to speak thus of one into whose future God alone could see? How came it that he lived to rejoice with his young brother in the truth of all that he had spoken? We think we know the answer, but each reader has a right to his own, so let it rest. But not till we have marked one practical lesson. Would to God that we were all as wise as Richard Knill, and habitually sowed beside all waters. On the day of his death, in his 80th year, David Brainerd, the apostle to the Indians, was occupied in teaching the alphabet to an Indian child at his bedside. A friend said, "Why not rest from your labors now?" "Because," replied the man of God, "I have prayed God to render me useful in my sphere, and he has heard my prayers. For now that I am unable to preach, he leaves me strength enough to teach this poor child his letters." To despise no opportunity of usefulness is a leading rule with those who are wise to win souls. Mr. Knill might very naturally have left the minister's little grandson on the plea that he had other duties of more importance than praying with children. And yet, who shall say that he did not affect as much by that act of humble ministry as by dozens of sermons addressed to crowded audiences? At any rate, to me, his tenderness in considering the little one was fraught with everlasting consequences, and I must ever feel that his time was well laid out. May we do good everywhere as we have opportunity, and results will not be wanting. Those who are curious as to further evidences of this story will find it in Mr. Birrell's biography of Richard Knill, though scarcely so fully told. No biographer was likely to know so much about it as myself, but yet the main facts are the same.